Hi there folks, this is Tony coming to you from New Zealand with the A Minute to Midnight Show, and with me today I have Dr Carol Tanksley, who has been on the A Minute to Midnight Show a couple of times, but the last time I think might have been 2020, so it's been a while. It's good to have you back, Dr Carol.
Oh, Tony, it is really good to be back. I still consider it kind of amazing that we're talking across the ocean just like we were, in the same room. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I know it is amazing to be able to do it this way, and it's really great that we can. Anyway, for the listeners that don't know who you are or haven't heard of you, perhaps you could give them a bit of a background.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll start by saying that some of my friends call me Doctor. I'm an OBGYN physician and practiced OBGYN for about 30 years. That has given me an opportunity to deal with women and couples in some of the most intimate aspects of their bodies and lives and relationships. And then about 10 years into my medical practice, roughly, I also felt very clearly that God was asking me to go into ministry. I did, got my Doctor of Ministry degree as well. So that's where some of my friends call me Doctor. And I did those two tracks for many years, medicine and ministry. And then for the last few years, not that long ago, I stopped seeing patients. What God was asking me to do in ministry kept growing and growing. And so now I'm full-time in the helping individuals and couples and groups and speaking and writing and things like that.
That sounds good. Okay, so, I mean, we all have different struggles, but there's a lot of common ones that people have, and couples and single people too, of course. So maybe you could give us a little bit of a rundown on some of what you're seeing at the moment, main issues that you're trying to deal with and help people with.
Yeah. Well, I think God must kind of chuckle when he sees me or thinks of me or talks to me, because a lot of what has been resonating with people has been around the topic of sexuality and intimacy and relationships. I would never have imagined God asking me to go into that arena, but I think it's such a huge issue in culture now, and it's even a big deal in the Christian church. There's lots of controversies that are directly related to sexuality, intimacy, and relationships, and there's so much pain from the phrase I use is intimacy gone wrong. Whether it's in marriage or, single people, and just some of the sexual conversations in culture, in the church, the LGBTQ conversations, the pornography, just huge pandemic, I would say, of how pornography is impacting so much, both in culture and in the church. And what I have been struck by is that even for those who feel like they have a pretty good understanding of what they think they should do in following God's plan, they often have such a big struggle in working that out. And I've come to see how this topic has much more to do with matters of the heart. We can talk about behaviors, and Tony, you know as well as I do, behaviors have consequences. What you do with your body has implications. But simply trying harder to behave a different way, I've just seen people wear themselves out and get depressed or discouraged or give up or whatever. And a real different paradigm comes when we start talking about some of the matters of the heart.
Right. You mentioned the LGBTQ thing, which I won't go into a lot, but, it's become a minefield. Like, I would never have believed a few years ago that we'd be at this situation where we're having to, kind of negotiate this minefield of different, genders, they call them, and all that. And as Christians, it's, I think it's a struggle because we don't agree with that whole agenda, or I personally don't, and yet, we're having to deal with people on a real world basis. So that's a tough one. And then, you've mentioned the other struggles, which many people have, and They're so common, and it's very easy, as you say, to get worn out. People don't want to be behaving sometimes the way they do, and it's like, oh, why have I gone and done this again, kind of a thing. So,
Yes.
oh yeah,
Yeah. Some people I talk to will say, well, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I don't like the way that I'm acting. It makes me think of what Paul says. I think it's in Romans 7, I don't do what I want to do, and I do what I don't want to do. And, oh, deliver me from this body of death. Paul was
yeah,
frustrated. There's debates about the specifics of some of what Paul means there, but I think it speaks to the struggle that a lot of people are feeling, and how just addressing behavior stops short of bringing real change. And I think perhaps especially around the sexuality and relationships issues, because those go so deep into our hearts. Jesus addressed matters of the heart in this very arena. I think of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus said, if you look at a woman to lust after her in your heart, you have committed adultery. So Jesus was looking at matters of the heart. That had nothing specifically to do with behavior. Jesus is looking at the heart. So yeah, if you're married and you have an affair on your spouse, it's certainly going to have implications. There's going to be fallout. But especially in that moment, Jesus is looking much deeper at matters of the heart. And when we can understand what some of those are, and one important way to think about it, Tony, is you didn't wake up one day and decide to have an affair on your spouse, or to get hooked on pornography, or, to get a sexually transmitted infection. Yes, those, behaviors result in certain things, but what about the matters in your heart that led you there? What are the pathways in your brain that started the pathway down for you to do some of those things that have brought pain and destruction and so on? Understanding how you learned about sex, sexuality, relationships, intimacy, how you learn to deal with the needs that you feel. And this isn't just facts. This isn't just information. It's also the emotional content of that, the experiences, what you saw between your parents growing up, for example, or the early experiences you had as you learned you were a girl or a boy, and friendships, and then romantic, all of that plays into dealing with those roots is an important part of finding the kind of life and goodness and transformation that Jesus offers us.
yes, that's true. Yeah, I guess it's gotten even harder these days. Like I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, being introduced to magazines and, some other boys and that, look at these pictures. And at that, I think I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 at that point. And being kind of, what's this? And then, it's hard to escape from it. But now it's like everywhere. Like it was,
Yes.
then it was much, you had to have magazines or something. Now it's just everywhere. The internet's saturated with it. News sites everywhere have adverts designed to tantalize people and get them hooked on stuff. So it's a minefield. And man, I really feel for young kids and people growing up.
Absolutely. And you are so right. It's not like anyone has to decide, I'm going to go look for porn now. I mean, it just comes, it comes on your smartphone. You've got it in your pocket. And even if you have children, and even if you don't allow your child to have a smartphone to get on the internet, if they're riding the bus to school, their friend sitting next to them on the bus to school, may have one. And so it is such it's such a hook. And Tony, I really believe that the devil has leveraged this in a destructive way much more than we sometimes imagine. He knows how big the need for intimacy is in us. And he also knows that sex used in an illegitimate way can be like junk food, pulling somebody to go there, and it creates hooks in your brain to try and fill that legitimate need in an illegitimate way. And he does it so well.
Yeah, I can imagine there's all kinds of ways. And I would say, I mean, there must be a huge percentage of the population that has difficulties with this in one form or another. So it's not like, I mean, it's not talked about that much, but it's, something that probably everyone, well, not everyone, but a big majority of people would have some degree of struggle with, I would say.
Yes. I, not that long ago, talked with a young husband who had been hooked. And when he got married to his wife, God had dealt with him and he had stopped engaging in porn. But it was several months into their marriage before their sexual relationship became functional and healthy because of the pathways in his brain. But as important as pornography is, and as big as that is, I think this is even broader than just that. One of the lies that I believe the kingdom of darkness has used in hooking people is the lie that I must have a happy, satisfying sex life if I am to be fully alive and whole. It sounds like, okay, but it's so embedded in our culture that I think most people don't even realize they believe that. And the church has taken that and tried to sanctify it. And therefore, okay, then you must get married to be fully alive and whole. Because, okay, if sex is for marriage, which I believe, then you got to get married to have sex because that's the way you're fully alive. No. Witness Jesus. We follow a single Savior who was single during his entire earthly life. Would Jesus have been more fully alive if he had gotten married or had sex? No. He was the most fully alive human being ever. How did he do it? We can learn from him how to address those needs, legitimate needs in our soul that God put there, in a healthy way, rather than getting the lies that the enemy has promoted to get us off track.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, I guess from a man's perspective, obviously pornography is a big one, but I know there's a lot of women struggle with it too. But there must be an awful lot of women that have been, broken by bad relationships and abuse and all that kind of stuff in their past. Or, and then they come to get married and then they must bring a whole lot of issues as well. So, for two people to, we've all got whatever issues, and then to bring it together and to be able to, I mean, it's kind of a miracle God has to work, I suppose, in people. But
always. I believe it always is. And you referenced sexual harm. And that is such a big deal. And again, it's one of the other ways that the enemy uses this area to steal, kill, and destroy. We know from the best studies that are out there that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual harm by the time they're 18, sexual abuse of some kind or trauma. But the interesting thing is also that 1 in 6 men will admit to that. And there's something a little beyond what we think of the normal abuse or violence or, rape or molestation or whatever, as horrible as those things are. But there's other ways in which so many, and I think the majority of people, have experienced some kind of sexual harm. Things that have gotten them to believe messages that are wrong or ungodly or harmful, things that set them up for making sex about self-gratification versus building a relationship when you're married. And there can be all kinds of varieties, from whether it's molestation or sexual abuse or sexual violence or some of the other categories. The harm that comes to any of us in the sexual arena is especially powerful, I believe, because it gets deep in the core of who we are and causes people to put up walls. If you've been harmed, you don't want to hurt again. So you naturally are going to put up a barrier to prevent more harm, and that keeps you from healthy connections with others, whether you're married or single. It keeps other people at arm's length, and in marriage, it can keep husband and wife from deeply connecting at a heart level, whether they're able to have sex or not. And those kind of walls also impact our relationship with God. There's just the pattern of hiding, the pattern of letting that shame keep a blanket over you, keeps us from allowing God to do in us what he wants, from allowing Jesus to come in and be intimate in our souls to bring the healing and transformation. So intimacy with God becomes an issue too, as a result of that harm.
Right. Okay. So now, what about not just the sexual side of issues and all of that, but you put out sent an article out because if people want, they can get on a mailing list that you have and things, and an article about selfishness and how selfishness impacts relationships, because that's something that everyone struggles with the potential again, to be selfish or unselfish. It's a choice daily.
Yes. Whatever I do that I make all about me ends up imploding. It's kind of the catch-all human sin, if I can use that word. Self-gratification always ends up in destruction. And created beings have tried that ever since the beginning of time. Lucifer tried that in heaven. And that didn't turn out very well for him. And, we as humans now, when we fall into the pattern of making it all about me, what about me, what about me? Nobody wants to come closer to somebody who is making it all about them. Mm-hmm. Whether you're married or not, that applies between husband and wife. If you're married, it applies between any kind of relationships. That doesn't mean that you don't have legitimate needs. But I think a big part of self-care needs to include the understanding that even just my self-care is not only for my own benefit, it's to keep me in a position where I can relate to others and I can be useful to God. So it's not even like I'm taking care of myself for myself. It's about the bigger picture. Just mental health. That's another huge problem in culture today. Is mental health crisis, and selfishness plays into this also. When I am able to step out of myself enough to see somebody else's needs and extend myself on behalf of someone else, my own mood lifts. It's hard to be depressed and truly be helping someone else out of a generous heart. There was a Christian psychiatrist decades ago, Dr. Carol Tanksley. He was asked what he would tell someone to do if they felt like they were about to have a nervous breakdown. And Dr. Tanksley said, I would tell him to go out his front door, lock the door, walk across the railroad tracks, find somebody in need and help them. So it lifts your own mood. That's just the way God built us.
I guess sometimes the most selfish people are also the most miserable people, and the happiest people tend to be people that like to give out and help other people. Sure, they have struggles, but they generally are seeming to be much happier people.
Yes. There's a body of research that I have started to become aware of, and that's happiness research. And you are so right. The people who are engaged in relationships, who prioritize connection with others, that is one of the most important factors in people's happiness. And this was looked at in cultures around the world, rich cultures, poor cultures, different ethnicities, and it's those human relationships which you can't be in a close relationship with someone and make it all about you. It just doesn't work. God created us to need that connection, and that's got to be mutual.
And I think that's the thing when two people in a relationship assuming they're in a relationship, if they both have that attitude of giving and looking at to what they can do for the other person rather than what they can just get for themselves, I mean, that would tend to be the most happiest relationships, what I've noticed.
Yes. When we're talking about marriage or a romantic relationship moving toward marriage or whatever, yes. Some people, I think, in their heart believe that marriage is about getting my needs met and making me happy. Well, in a godly marriage, when both partners are people of goodwill and growing in their own life with God, there will be much joy and many needs will get met. But God never promised you that all your needs would get met, whether you're married or not. He never promised a happy marriage, never promised a happy sex life. I believe marriage, the primary purpose, is a laboratory in which to learn to love well. And love isn't turned in on itself. Love is giving. For those who are not married, I think the church can often do a much better job in helping unmarried people deal with the need for connection, heart-to-heart connection. But when an unmarried person steps out of themselves, whether that's with a good friend or with another couple, Jesus did that. He had his Peter, James, and John. Neurobiologically, we now understand some of what happens in a person's brain when they are connected deeply with a few others. You can't connect deeply on that level with 50 or 100 people, but like Jesus, one or two or three or four. So I think whether you're married or not, ask yourself, who is your Peter, James, and John? Who are you investing with? Who are you inviting into a heart-to-heart, knowing and being known kind of relationship? That's where we become whole. That's where our brains are healed, frankly.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So people that have gotten this far in may be starting to go, oh, okay, like whatever their situation is, that's not ideal, probably a myriad of different ones, and they might be going, okay, so what can we practically do to address our situation? Where do we go from here? So what can people actually do if they've got one or other of different difficulties,
Yes.
or multiple different ones? Where do they go? What do they do?
Yes. And I hear people in those situations a lot, whether it's, one spouse for necessities in one part of the world, whether that's, just because of life or military assignment or whatever, or, a single person who feels, lonely and isolated because their church doesn't have any other singles, or there can be all kinds of situations. Here's what I would say. Take a piece of paper and write down a list of a few people that you know. If you're married, ideally your spouse is a person of goodwill and they're on the list, but write down a few people that you know who might be safe, who might have a heart willingness to connect, and pray over your list, and then find a way to talk to just one. Start with just one. And tell that person, God is working to grow me, and I'm feeling impressed from him that I need to connect with a few people. I'm wondering if you might be one of my people. Can I tell you about something? That's hard, Tony. I'm a natural introvert, so I don't easily reach out and connect with somebody. I have to exert energy to do that. But it is the way God intended us to be. And then if that person says yes, then you share a piece of something that's a little bit challenging to share, or that's vulnerable, or that's hard or painful. And you're looking for the other person to, whether you're in person over a cup of coffee, or whether it's, through, FaceTime or Zoom now or whatever, you're looking for a person to just kind of lean forward and, oh, that sounds so hard, or me too. Tell me a bit more. When you can proactively invite somebody into a place in your world that's hard, first of all, it feels less isolating. The shame or the pain becomes disinfected when you allow somebody else to see you there. Remember, Jesus did it with Peter, James, and John, even though it was imperfect and it was messy. They let him down. People will not be perfect ever for you, but take that step. Reach out and invite somebody to see and know you, and then you offer the same.
Yeah, I agree, but I suppose the other side of that is you have to be able to trust people, because if you're sharing intimate stuff, personal stuff, it can easily come back to bite you and hurt you. And I was just listening to an old Derek Prince sermon last night, and he was saying, and by and large, he's discovered that Christians are treacherous people, and it shouldn't be. So we've got to make sure we're not like that. But I guess, yeah.
Yes. And one more piece on that. Trust is a huge issue, and many people, they have already been in many interactions with people where their trust has let, they've trusted and they've been harmed as a result. They've been let down or betrayed or whatever. So what I would say is trust is not all or nothing. As a person grows in emotional maturity, you come to understand that it's not black or white. Nobody's perfect, but you get to choose who to connect with. Not everybody is worthy of your trust or your sharing. So it does need to be thoughtful. You need to choose carefully. So choose somebody who might be safe, and then you test it out. You test it out with just, for example, a piece of your story or a piece of your struggle, and see how they respond. Wait a bit, because your own internal nervous system is going to be stretched a bit. And so you're looking for a kind of interaction where, okay, this might be safe. I might be able to build a new memory here with somebody. It's not going to be perfect. It's challenging, but I'm taking a step. And then, just like Peter, James, and John did with Jesus, if somebody lets you down, if they are broken and want to repair the relationship, you do that hard work. You give yourself a bit of time to breathe, to heal, and then you go at it again. And I also need to say that pursuing intimacy with Jesus, letting him really into these challenging places in our souls, has to be the foundation. We have talked more about people, but intimacy with Jesus has to be the foundation, because he's the only one who will truly never let you down. He will never let you go.
Yeah, that's very true. So you've written a book not too long ago and published it, and perhaps you could tell listeners about that book, and also if they're wanting to reach out to you, what's your website, and whatever, various things like that. Yep.
Right. Well, thank you, Tony. My recent book is Sexpectations: Reframing Your Good and Not So Good Stories About God, Love, and Relationships. This is about the matters of the heart. This isn't talking about what's right or wrong, although we do address a bit of that. There are lots of little stories in here, people that I have come to know in various settings. So there's lots of examples for men and for women, for those who are married, for those who are unmarried, dealing with the matters of the heart around our need for intimacy. We talk about how God intended sex and intimacy to be connected, but they're not exactly the same. Within marriage, God intended sex and intimacy to be connected, within the covenant. But what about all the matters of the heart? For some people who aren't married, that can seem like a bigger challenge. For some people who are married, well, my spouse is having trouble with our sexual relationship, or I am. How do I deal with that? Most importantly, this book talks about Jesus coming into your story, looking at your story with honesty and compassion and inviting Jesus into that. The website to find out more about that particular project is yoursexpectations.com. Make sure you put the your there. Yoursexpectations.com. You can find out above the book, and we have a bunch of other downloads there that you can connect with. And then our main website is drcarolministries.com. And I would love to hear from folks.
That sounds great. That's been a very interesting, I guess, shortish discussion. There's so much you can't cover in such a short period of time, but hopefully people will get onto your website and they can get onto your mailing list too, right?
Yes. At any of those places, at Your Sexpectations, we have a free download about sexual healing God's way. If you get that free download, you're on our mailing list, so you will hear from us weekly. We've got a free quiz there that does the same. You can get a free chapter of the book that does the same. You can, once you get one of those resources, then you can hear from us weekly, being part of our mailing list. And I love connecting with folks in that way.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Carol, for being on the A Minute to Midnight show today. And let's try not to leave it 4 years or whatever it's been again to do another one.
Well, my prayers are with you too, Tony. And yes, let's not make it 4 years until next time. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Bless you too. And folks, remember to visit us at aminutemidnight.com with midnight spelt MIDNITE. Please subscribe to us if you haven't already done so. And we do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. Thank you to the folks that do donate. And if anyone else wants to, you can donate to A Minute to Midnight to help us at aminutemidnight.com. And the music used, I've written, played and recorded. So God bless and God willing, we'll be back with another show in a few days' time.